On this episode of 5 Minutes of Cloud, what does infrastructure as a service mean for enterprise users? So we talk about infrastructure as a service when we talk about cloud as one of the service models that people consume. Infrastructure as a service being access to classic data center infrastructure, usually in an on-demand self-service fashion. And again, if we go back to the NIST cloud model, on-demand is a core component of that. Pooled resources. Hey, I have lots of compute, lots of storage, lots of network. This makes it potentially easier to deploy my applications. But there is potentially a mismatch, because when people talk about enterprise applications, often there is an idea that sort of sits behind that in terms of what kind of infrastructure that application expects and requires, and there might be a mismatch between that and infrastructure as a service. So real quick, when we talk about an enterprise application, often we're talking about an application that has an expectation of infrastructure resiliency. These are applications that expect to have 2 or more network links so that if any network link fails, the application doesn't stop working. Often these applications have equivalent expectations around the storage backend that they're connecting to, or just the fact that the compute resource itself has been built with potentially replicated internal memory or CPUs that can actually deal with errors in a much more efficient fashion. This is a little bit at odds to what people usually talk about when they talk about infrastructure as a service, because here we're talking about the concept, at least, of lightweight resources. Usually it's servers that have just a single network connection, so the physical resource itself only has one pathway. The most common infrastructure as a service, at least public infrastructure as a service vendor, Amazon Web Services, by default, your instances only have one network interface anyway. Now, their infrastructure might be a little bit more robust. I'm not trying to say it is or isn't, but usually when people talk about cloud-based infrastructure as a service offerings, they're usually building lighter weight systems to actually support those environments, which means that an enterprise application may have a slight mismatch in terms of how it would be deployed on an infrastructure as a service offer. Now, that doesn't mean that infrastructure as a service is the wrong model for enterprise applications. It's just that there needs to be an expectation in terms of the application's deployment model. If your enterprise application is a monolithic application that doesn't scale horizontally, that the only way that you can deal with more users consuming your application is to put it on a bigger server, those applications can absolutely be deployed on infrastructure as a service, but you have to realize that the limitations are going to come from the maximum scale that you can get out of any one particular physical piece of hardware within that infrastructure as a service offer. And usually those machines are not the biggest machines that you can buy. They're somewhere in the middle of the pack or even at the lower end of the pack, because part of the mental model behind most infrastructure as a service deployments is a lightweight, low-cost solution. So considering migrating an enterprise application to infrastructure as a service, if you have a monolithic single system app, then you just have to be aware that there's probably going to have to be some additional monitoring that gets applied to that application, so that if that one server that it happens to reside on fails, there's a backup process for that and a recovery process for that single instance. More enterprise applications these days are actually being built with at least the ability to build redundancy into the infrastructure. So I can have 2 applications running, one in active mode and maybe one is in a standby or ready to take over kind of a mode. And this actually works fairly well for most infrastructure service offers. Most systems actually have the ability to include things like a load balancer, so something that can redirect traffic to the passive standby system if the active system quits responding. So you can actually leverage the tools of the infrastructure as a service space to enable some of the monitoring and management that you would have to do otherwise in a manual configuration environment. So deploying enterprise applications into infrastructure as a service is possible. It's just the models might have to change a little bit. So that's really the view, though, of infrastructure as a service. It is a lightweight, potentially unreliable, or usually considered unreliable infrastructure. So to deploy enterprise applications into that space, one just has to take a little bit more care in how they're monitoring and managing the failures that will likely occur at the hardware level against their application, which maybe in the past had not expected those kinds of failures to ever propagate up to the application level. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. In addition, if you want to stay apprised of the latest ongoing updates in the cloud space, sign up for our Twitter feed and our mailing list. We also update you on upcoming webinars and classes that we provide.